I think we're without the lavalier mic today, and I'm a lot shorter than the other people who've been up here at the podium this morning. Can you pick me up okay? Okay, that sounds great. I wish I sounded greater, but we'll see how this works out. I've been back since Tuesday in the States, and took only 2 days to get the sinus stuff going again here. So I have to decide. I have to conclude after 4 months in Mexico, where I go, and long enough to get, super well from it all, that something is here that hits me almost immediately. Maybe it's it's in my house, but I've been working in other people's houses this week too, so I have no idea what's going on. But I apologize for the hoarseness of my voice. So the time frame that I was gone, I relate to you, Martha, about what the story I heard about not knowing where you are, or whatever. I was there 4 months and spoke 5 times, and this morning I'm thinking about part of what I'm going to say today, and I think, did I already talk about that here, or was that in Mexico, or so I'm kind of in that same sort of bilocating challenge. At any rate, your theme this month has to do with diversity, sort of unity through diversity. And as soon as I saw the theme, which was like the day before I came back, I think I finally looked it up on my email, I thought, well, I think I know what I want to talk about, because I've been thinking about this very much more deeply in some ways since I met a woman in Mexico when I was down there who is a woman of color, Dominicana, and she lived for about 10 years in the United States, but she went to Mexico as a late teen. And then when she ended up in the United States with her then husband, who was an American, she lived in Nashville for 10 years. This is back in the 80s. And she did reconciliation work between black women and white women using art and spirituality as the bridge between them. And my conversations with her and reading the book that she wrote about that whole few years, well, after she came to the States, she became a therapist. And as a therapist, this is the kind of work that she did. And it was truly masterfully put together how she did this and the kinds of results that she got. And thinking back in the 80s, these were women who were still, the same women who as younger women had to go in the back of the theater and couldn't drink out of the water fountain because this is Nashville, Tennessee. So they were definitely a diverse environment there that became, over time, a segregated environment, and then the attempt to integrate or reunify. So I think that's part of where we're coming from in our own head as well as in our lives here. And I've also been very blessed to be gone from here for 4 months, and I really don't know what the heck's going on, but I'm sure it's the same kind of cultural war craziness that was going on when I left. So the diversity aspect of that is right in our faces all the time. So how do we get to this world that works for everyone? In my opinion, I'm going to talk about beliefs today, so I have to say this is my opinion or my belief, but it's a world that works through everyone. If we believe and subscribe to what we believe, right? That God can only do for us what God can do through us, right? So how can God help us to create a world that works for everyone if it's not through everyone? And the everyone is everyone, as well as the one. So we have this oneness that Martha read to us about that is a piece of the goal or the aspiration or the inspiration, sometimes the perspiration to get there, that seems very challenging and difficult to embrace that idea, that vision. Until we can see it, we can't manifest it, we can't create it. I liked what you read too, Martha, about the idea that God can manifest for us any more or less than we can manifest for ourselves. Just the only difference is that God knows it and we don't. So I thought that was an interesting line to pull out of your thing. So this world that works for everyone has to be through everyone, not the world that works for everyone just based on our way, our culture, our big idea, our intention around it. And we have to be willing to open up to what everyone involved brings to the table. And the way I look at it is we have to sort of let it in order to let it go. When I believe, and you all can have your own opinion about this or not, but I believe that we are all prejudiced. We are all internal advocates for ourselves and our belief system. And you've heard me say before here that I see belief system as BS. You know, that's my BS, your BS, his BS, whatever. But it's all BS because we've all created it. Somehow or another, I think there's an attitude that we believe something, it's true, and how could it not be so obvious that it's true? And then we're not recognizing that this belief didn't come from nowhere. It didn't just like fall in out of the sky on us. We actually construct our beliefs. And this construction and deconstruction process is what I believe has to happen in order for us to get to the world that works for everyone. So we're all prejudiced, we're all chauvinistic, and I'm not talking about the male-female thing, but we all have things that we champion. And it's mostly what we believe and what fits our needs, what fits our little box of ideas about how it's supposed to work. But I think that within the science of mind structure, we believe something, we perceive it based on that belief, and then we receive it based on the first two parts of the process. So we believe, we perceive, we receive. So we have this continual cycle of refreshing our own idea about how something works because we're not looking at examining or changing our beliefs. So there was a little discussion this morning about change that's going on here, but this doesn't happen in a vacuum either. So I want to invite you to consider the story of the blind men and the elephant. I wore a little elephant today. That was a necklace that belonged to a friend of mine that passed away in January. So I have an elephant here to remind me of this whole story as well. But most of you have heard this story, right? About the blind men who are brought in by the king to examine the elephant and describe what it is and how it looks and what they think it is. And so they have this impossibility, even if they were sighted. They couldn't all be on all parts of the elephant at all times. But our beliefs are blind spots. And so part of the moral to that story is that we're all blind at some level because we're localized in our belief. So the guy that's got the trunk thinks it all looks like this, big fat hose or rope kind of a thing. The guy that's at the end where the tail is thinks it maybe looks like a snake or something. The guy that has the ear thinks it's a fan. It moves back and forth. It bruises the air, makes it, And how are we different from the blind men and the elephant in our beliefs? Because we have the same understanding of something that we've come to create in our mind is the truth and is the only truth because it's our truth. And as we go through our lives, we're carrying around that elephant with us. We only see the part that we see. And so when it comes to the prospect of looking at others or allowing someone else to be a part of our lives that doesn't think, feel, act, look, behave the way we do, where is our belief about it stuck on our part of the elephant? So the elephant, in my opinion, metaphorically in the story, is the unknowable. The blind men are brought in. They can't know the whole elephant. We can't know the whole truth. We can't know the whole God. No one of us, no religion, no group, no society has got the answer that's the be-all and end-all to know it all. And that unknowable reality that's the elephant, it's too expansive, it's too big, it's too beyond the scope of the blind men to know the whole. And yet they come away, just as we do in our own little world, with the idea that this is it. This is it. And they're very stubborn with the king and with each other about what they understand the part of the elephant to be, that they're certain this is what it is. And this level of certainty is something that I know in my world, and I don't think I'm unique, that we build this up in this construct of beliefs. We start out as very young children with an open mind. I hope we come in more or less with an open mind. And Ernest Holmes suggests that we should stay open. We should stay open at the top. But I don't know that very many of us are truly capable of the level of openness that it takes to get beyond what we've learned, which is mostly localized. it's tribal, it's cultural, it's national, sometimes it's political. But these are the things that are the AL words that are all about how we get in this geographical, tribal, cultural understanding of what the world is and how it works. And our worldview is limited by that level of experience. Martha talked in her reading about the experience of God. I think if we had more experience of God and more mysticism about how we see God and how we see the God in each other, if we sort of namaste up, as I call it, that we would be able to have a better world simply because working through each of us, the world that works for everyone would come about more, because we would be as beautiful as we feel. We would get up every day and share the love in every way that the song that these guys were singing about was offering us. So the blind men, they didn't have that opportunity, but they had the same problem that we have, which is that we have a belief that's based on what we think, what we've thought chronically, what we've thought over and over again. That's what's wired together, fired together to create that belief. And we choose to call it a belief, and we think it's the truth and the only truth, and that we're walking around with our piece of the elephant as the only truth. And our concept of it is so limited by all this local, tribal, geographical, national stuff that I talked about. We've built a very small base to the pyramid of our belief system that only widens when we get more experience of God, more experience of other people, more experience of travel, whatever, however you are open to gaining experience in your life, staying open to it is the issue. But the social scientists teach us that we're not too open. All the work that the social scientists do in their research, we're not very open. And I would submit that I'm not either. We're not as open as we think we are, and we're not as loving as we think we are. But we have this chronic thinking that's the belief system that we've developed over time that we haven't questioned enough. And it's this idea behind the questioning and the self-inquiry that I truly think is the basis of how we get beyond where we are into the opportunity to consider the possibility that somebody else's truth, although it may look completely different from ours, it may feel completely different from ours, is their truth just like ours is our truth, and probably neither one of them is the truth, with the capital T. There's no lock on this, and as there's no knowability on this, as I said, the elephant is the unknown reality, the unknowable God, the unknowable universe, the unknowable expanse of what is out there that we cannot possibly know. So we start at that level of what's the unknowable at one end of the spectrum, and at the other end of the spectrum, we carry around with us what we just know to be the obvious. Well, it's just so obvious. So that my belief is so patently obvious to me, why isn't it equally as obvious to you or to them or that other out there? And of course, they're in the same paradigm. That their truth, their idea, their perspective about it, their believe, perceive, receive of how the world comes through them is different from mine, but it's equally as like, well, why doesn't Peggy get this? It's just so obvious. Well, there's like, 8 billion people on the planet now? So there's 8 billion versions of the obvious. Pretty daunting, right? To think about, and so the obvious isn't really so obvious after all, if you consider it from that perspective, because those 8 billion people that all have their own version of what's totally obvious to them at that end of the spectrum. And so how do we get somewhere, the likelihood we're not going to get to the knowable out of the unknowable. But we can certainly look at ourselves and move beyond what we consider to be obvious by opening up out of this bubble. We create this bubble that we live in that is our BS, that is our obvious, that is our sense of it's the trunk, it's the hose, it's the snake, it's the, that's it. That's it. And until we're ready and willing and able to let it in order to let it go, because acceptance has to come from some level internally that it's experiential. Otherwise, what you have is this integration, segregation, tolerance kind of thing that my friend that had lived in Nashville talked about to me. And toleration isn't necessarily, I mean, it might be a step in the right direction, but it's not going to get us to the world that works for everyone through the world that with the world that works through everyone. I don't believe. Because there's still this judgment that sits there in the level of tolerance. It's made a nice home there. And it's real tight, and it's definitely a part of our what's obvious. Well, it's obvious that we can take this spiritual bypass and we can let this go on, and we can say, well, we have to let that be, and we have to tolerate it, but I don't know that gets to the level of acceptance even. And beyond the level of acceptance, I think where we have to get is the level of loving and embracing it all. And those are the standards for me in the process of how do I walk up the step of the ladder of growth, rather than what's called by some social psychologists the ladder of inference. The ladder of inference comes from our idea of what's obvious, from our sense of what's true, from our belief. Our belief is just what we think. And the problem with it is we believe everything we think. So our beliefs are based on this thought process that needs to have a grain of salt treated with it. It just, how did I get there? We're real good about doing things in our spiritual work about how did I get the belief system I got? How do I unpack this thing? How do I find out that, well, when I was 3 years old, this happened, and so that's why I believe this, and that's why I react this way, and I'll never get over it because it happened to me when I was 3. We're real good about that in our teachings and in our workshops and our experiences. And then we take that even and apply it to the other guy. We project it on the other guy. Well, that must have happened to him when he was 3 too, because that's why he's acting like that too. And yet we don't really question either one of those perspectives of the construct of how those beliefs got the way they got. And then just let go of it. Just accept it for what it is. But if you sit down in the political arena today and you look at what people are doing, it's like Facebook. I mean, the cultural world's on Facebook. I don't even bother with Facebook, but the things I hear about indirectly is enough to go, blow me back at what, and maybe it's because it's kind of anonymous, or people are sort of strangers to each other, like, the friend of my friend of the friend of the friend of the friend is talking to this other friend of the friend of the friend that they don't know each other, they have no idea who they are, and they can say, well, you're an idiot, or you are just missing the obvious here, you're crazy. And that's what it is. We have this judgment process that we go through that says anything that doesn't look like, sound like, behave like, or be like we are is crazy, or close to it. The idea that we're crazy would never enter our mind, So it's about this judgment level that we sit in and that we come from, that's in the toleration, that's even in this spiritual communities. It's here. It's here right within this church. I'm certain of it. Because there's going to be somebody that's got the idea that somebody else ain't what they are, or hasn't got what they want, or, we all sit in these judgment things, and it's all a matter of one up, one down instead of just one. So there's this superiority, or there's this inferiority, these things that are going on all the time, that it's not serving our higher purpose and our higher beliefs, that the oneness is the goal, that the oneness is where it comes from and ends up in. So why do we go through this otherness in between? The separation that Martha mentioned in her reading, that we've set up ourselves. I mean, I don't think God created the separation. We did. God didn't move, I did, to feel that separation from spirit. So we got to let other people in and allow them to show us who they are and make it safe for that to happen. For us to allow ourselves to show ourselves who we are to ourselves first, as well as to the others. Because when our bubble bumps up against their bubble, we need to just break the bubbles and take those ladders of inference that we sit there and say, well, they must have had this, and this must have happened there, and this is where this went, and that's how that went. And so we get to this ladder of inference all the way up here, and then we say, well, no. My ex-husband once was in a study in his college business school classes for a marketing guy that went on to be very well known in the United States. And the studies that they did and the conclusions they came to is that after the age of 10, If we come up against something new or someone who has a new idea or a new belief and it doesn't fit internally, we're not internally coherent with it, we have basically two choices we make. We reject them or we reject the idea. So, something is going to get pushed out away from us because it doesn't match up. And the only way we get to the real charge of making the belief changeable or acceptable on some level, our belief changeable to accept theirs, is if we are willing to validate it externally. Is there a real fact here? Is there a real objective opportunity to see that my belief was kind of crazy? Yesterday, I was with my daughter's half-brother, and he went outside in the dark on the patio, and there was a black widow spider there, and he got all like crazy phobic. Well, those are beliefs that are truly crazy, and we recognize them for craziness, right? That, there's no such need to have this fear of something that is so tiny and more scared of you than you are of it. But because when it happened when he was 3 or whatever, he's still carrying that around. And yet that's real obvious for us to see. But it's no different on the level of smaller or bigger beliefs in terms of how it got created, how it got constructed, and how it needs to be deconstructed in order to change that. So what I invite you to do is to consider, I want to have a little song played, and it's going to take a few minutes. And by the time you get through the point of hearing the chorus a couple times, feel free to sing along. And then I want to close. But I heard this song, and I thought, this is where I am, where I think many people are, and what are we willing to do to change ourselves, to change the next little smallest doable increment that we can change, to make the world a better place, to be the world that works for everyone, through everyone. So can you play the song? This is by Chris Christopherson. You guys remember that guy? Most of us in this room are old enough, right?
Young enough to believe in revolution, am I strong enough to get down on my knees and pray, and am I high enough on the chain of evolution to respect myself and my brother and my sister, and perfect myself in my own peculiar way? I get lazy and forget my obligations. I'd go crazy if I paid attention all the time, and I want justice, but I'll settle for some mercy on this holy road through the universal mind. Am I young enough to believe in revolution? Am I strong enough to get down on my knees and pray? Am I high enough on the chain of evolution to respect myself and my brother and my sister, and perfect myself in my own peculiar way? I got lucky, I got everything I wanted, I got happy, there was nothing else to do, and I'd be crazy not to wonder if I'm worthy of the part I play in this dream that's coming true. Am I young enough to believe in revolution? Am I strong enough to get down on my knees and pray? And am I high enough on the chain of evolution to respect myself and my brother and my sister, and perfect myself in my own peculiar way?
Respect our brother and sister and perfect ourselves in our own peculiar way, that individualized self that we are as a spark of spirit. Let go of your part of the elephant and decide that you can let something else in, that there is an opportunity for growth in every person you meet, every place you go, everything you do, and question yourself. And question yourself about them. What happened to them? How did they get this way? What would you have to believe? What would you have to know? What would you have to be so certain is obvious? To have that idea that that's obvious when it's so different from your idea of what's obvious. But let it go in order to let it in order to let it transform. Namaste.